when a driver is distracted, they're not two moving objects are not being seen at once. So it's like if you're driving and the barriers there and everything, it's still there as you're going on, but you may not see that car that's turning. You may not see that pedestrian that's crossing the street. So those moving objects, I mean, it only takes one glance away from the dashboard or away from focusing that can cause a crash. I think people don't realize that it only takes a second with distracted driving. 1 second looking away from the road and you could, cause a crash. So.
Why don't we dive right in?
Sure thing.
Okay. Well, first, this involves a fact sheet that was issued by the Governor's Office on Highway Safety and the state's Department of Public Health. What is the overall topic of the fact sheet?
So the focus is distracted driving. We produce the Georgia Traffic Safety Facts along with the Department of Public Health's codes program. So we have various focus areas, for example, motorcycle injuries and deaths. We have uh, older drivers, younger drivers. So this one focuses on distracted driving. So any form of distracted driving, whether it be actions done in the car that would make you distracted, as well as of course, the cell phone that we all think of when we think of distracted driving. So,
Of course, and all the typical things of, reading something, trying to write something, looking in the back seat at a noisy kid,
yeah,
all
eating,
the
talking.
basics.
Yeah.
What is, and this may seem obvious, but what is the goal in issuing this particular fact sheet?
So the main goal with the fact sheets is just to give a data-driven perspective of the issue of distracted driving. So in our document, we did do an observational study. So actual observations of drivers in motion in Georgia and the level of distracting. And those findings were, I think, relatively alarming, considering that unlike a seatbelt where, your entire drive, if you're wearing a seatbelt, if you're not, it's the whole time. Whereas distraction, it's for a moment, you come back for a moment, and you come back. So the fact that 1 out of 5 drivers were distracted is telling of how serious this issue is. So we just wanted to bring that to light with the data. Another thing is that when we were looking at crashes, about 53% of crashes are caused by distracted driving, involve a distracted driver. So either suspected or confirmed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, you mentioned the observational study, and obviously that was part of the information that you put in there, but I know there were some other sources. Where else did you pull information from for this report?
Yeah, let me grab that for you. So aside from the observational study, we have the National Center for Statistics and Analysis, and that was just a study done on drivers with electronic devices. World Health Organization, we have it's mainly more some quotes in there, and then of course conviction data as well as the crash reports.
Okay. And
And I'm
just to
sorry, I should have mentioned too hospital data as well.
Okay.
So.
Just to clarify, this involves all vehicles on Georgia highways. There's no breakout of any specific group.
Yes, yeah, it involves all drivers.
Okay. I'd like to talk about some of the key findings there. For example, you mentioned the 53% figure for the percentage of motor vehicle crashes that had some distraction involved. What were some of the other key findings listed in the fact sheet?
Some other key findings we have were, so the 30% of all serious injury crashes involved at least one confirmed or suspected distracted driver. We also have, let's see, I have it up here. I just want to make sure I have the numbers right. 76% of all distraction-related crashes involved at least one other vehicle. That's important because you think that's a threat to everybody. It's not just the people in the vehicle, or it's not just the distracted driver. It can be a pedestrian. It's other cars on the road as well. And that's 76% is high. And then since the hands-free law came into effect, the convictions for distracted driving have increased significantly as well.
Do you know what percentage of the crashes that listed distracted driving as the primary cause? I know there's that 53% for it's involved, but what about as the primary cause of a particular incident?
We don't have that. The issue with that is it's hard to tell after the fact when you see a crash exactly what caused it. But we view it as involved is oftentimes enough of a catalyst to study it and see it as an issue. So
Sure. In looking at the figures and in looking at the overall issue of distracted driving, is it worse in some parts of the state compared with others, or in comparison with the country overall, other states?
I think that though it's an issue nationwide, I do see more data pointing to metro areas, so more populated areas, whereas seatbelt use tends to be more of an issue in the rural areas from our findings at least. But again, it's a growing issue. It's a problem everywhere. We are seeing it being even more of a disparity with the younger drivers too. They're having more distraction related crashes, and I can only attribute it, and this was coming from my opinion, but to the cell phone use and texting and driving or using media and driving. It's becoming normalized, which isn't a good thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I want to look a little bit further into that 53% figure, and I'm wondering, did the fact sheet break that down any further? For example, did it look at how many were confirmed to be distracted driving, how many were suspected of being, or was there any other breakdown of that figure?
Yes, so it's 4% confirmed and 49% uh, suspected distraction related. And I know some people say, well, how is that figure viewed? And the problem with confirming again is an officer on scene uh, after the fact, it's hard to confirm that that crash had a distracted driver, though they look at various factors of the crash, and that's how you come up with this suspected analysis or the suspected metric there.
Well, and I would think that there would be a certain degree of difficulty in nailing that down because in many cases, you're depending on the driver themselves to kind of self-report whether they were distracted. Is that something that you saw a lot in the figures you were gathering?
Yeah, we do see that, and then it's also sadly, if there's a fatality or a serious injury, the awareness there might not even be there. Crashes happen in the blink of an eye, so it is definitely looking at the analysis of the crash, looking at how the post-crash analysis is constructed that we can gauge if it was a suspected, and I think the suspected metric is pretty reliable. In fact, oftentimes I think it's underreported. So
Hmm. Well, that makes a certain amount of sense. One of the figures I saw in there that caught my attention, 76% of all distraction-related crashes involved at least one other vehicle besides the distracted driver. Um, did you get any feedback in terms of why that's the case?
I as far as why there's other vehicles being involved.
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, because I would think some of them would involve single vehicle crashes, people running off the road and all that. But is it just a matter, for example, that just with the traffic density, it's more likely?
I think that, and then also when a driver is distracted, they're not two moving objects are not being seen at once. So it's like if you're driving and the barriers there and everything, it's still there as you're going on, but you may not see that car that's turning. You may not see that pedestrian that's crossing the street. So those moving objects, I mean, it only takes one glance away from the dashboard or away from focusing that can cause a crash. I think people don't realize that it only takes a second with distracted driving. 1 second looking away from the road and you could, cause a crash. So.
Okay. In putting together all these figures, one of the things I was curious about, at the beginning, you mentioned a lot of examples of what constitutes distracted driving, but I'm wondering if you had a particular formal definition of distracted driving you worked with, or you were just depending on the examples to kind of define it.
We do. We developed a definition, and there's also the national definition of distracted driving. I cannot provide you with that. I'm going to read it. So the distracted driving occurs when drivers divert their attention from driving task to focus on some other activity. This could be texting. However, it could also be manual, visual, or cognitive distractions. And then cell phone use can actually involve multiple, as you can imagine.
Okay. And you used three terms there, manual, visual, and cognitive. Again, that may seem to some extent obvious what you mean by those, but can you explain what types of behavior fall under each of those terms?
Yes. So for manual, you would think something like touching or holding a phone, eating or drinking, changing the controls on your navigation, your radio, things like that. Visual is the easier one to understand, looking away, looking at your phone, looking at a billboard perhaps. And then cognitive would be conversations, like you said, turning around and talking to the riders in the back seat, worrying about something or someone else, and not having your mind on driving. So, and those are some of the ones that people think of less when they think of distracted driving. So
Okay. One of the facts in there, again, that caught my attention, since the hands-free law took effect, and I'm reading here from the fact sheet, the number of distracted driving convictions processed by the Department of Driver Services continues to increase, and that seems kind of on the surface contradictory. I'm curious, is this simply showing that increased enforcement is going to bring in more violations, or does the figure show the actual frequency of distracted driving is increasing?
I think the actual frequency isn't increasing. When before the law, it wasn't as easy to convict these cases
Yeah.
or follow up on them. So I think that's more what it is that the issue is continuing to increase or at least maintain. And now there's a method to convicting these cases, whereas before it was a little bit more difficult.
That figure obviously focuses on cell phone related distraction. Do you know what percentage of distractions do involve cell phones and how much is due to other causes?
You know, if it's possible, can I call it follow up with you? I
Sure.
can't recall from the fact sheet that I have that data, but I can ask. Sorry, just
Okay. Not a problem at
yeah, I don't
all.
want to give a number I don't have, but yeah, I can.
Something else, you cited a figure from the World Health Organization specifically regarding the use of mobile phones in crashes. Can you explain that figure and what it tells us?
Yes, so the World Health Organization, and it was 4 times more likely to be involved in a crash than other drivers. So they're showing that because it impacts a driver's reaction time, that they're 4 times more likely to actually get in a crash because you're looking away from the road or you're not focusing on the road. Um, yeah, so
Okay.
it's alarming to think 4 times more likely.
Yeah, that is. That is. A lot of states have turned to require hands-free use. It's becoming much more common. In fact, I think maybe the majority at this point.
Yeah,
Based on the figures you found, does it appear that hands-free requirements help?
I think that because I think it does. I would advocate for we look at things from a safe system approach. So what that means is safer people, safer roads. We need to be proactive about EMS. So it's not a sort of a one-stop shop with the hands-free law, but I think that's an important part of prevention and sort of denormalizing it. Years ago, a seatbelt people felt was almost optional. We need people to realize that using your phone while driving isn't normal. It isn't okay. It's illegal. So I think that they do have an effect, though it will happen over time and have an increased effect over time.
Okay.
I'm not a
There's a
lawmaker, but that would be my opinion from the data. Yeah.
um, there's a lot more figures in there that we could go over that are interesting to me. Certainly, the figures for younger drivers, breakdowns by age and gender, and comparing distraction versus seatbelt use. And I wish we had time to go into all those, but you've gathered a lot of information here about the scope of the problem, and it leads to kind of an obvious question to me. How do we fix this problem? Is that something that you can address?
Yes, I think so. Now, some of this would be speculation, of course, but
Yeah.
like I said, it's there's more than one part to it. I think as far as vehicle technology has been a great help with those alerts that notify a driver when they're, they're departing a lane or something like that. Safer speeds. If you're distracted, the faster you are going, the further distance you're driving while distracted. So I think there's more than one part to it. And then encouraging our younger drivers not to be distracted, normalizing not using your phone, pulling over when you have, something important to do on your cell phone. I think there's a lot of modeling that can be done with that and encouraging people not to just automatically think that it's okay to use a cell phone when they're driving. And then even the little things like the conversations, eating, those things you don't really think of, realizing that that can cause a danger. And that's why we try to put this information out there when you hear data like 76% of these crashes include a car that isn't the distracted driver, it makes you think, well, this is affecting everyone, not just those of us who are driving. So
Okay.
I think there's a lot to it. And I also think that since it is a growing problem, it's something that most states are focusing on, and it's important. It's an important topic.
Fantastic. Tanya, that's all I have. Thank you so much for the information.
Yeah,
Really
thank
appreciate it.
you. Yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your day to meet with us.